At Meridian Tower, the day rose in polished glass and steel, and the floor that mattered most already carried the faint electricity of rumor and anticipation. Celeste Morgan stepped out of the elevator in a burgundy suit that fit like a dream. At 42, she was the presence that turned busy rooms quiet without asking. Assistants straightened in their chairs, partners stopped mid-sentence. A tray of cappuccinos hesitated and then resumed its path, as if the cups had remembered their manners. Celeste nodded once to Sophia at reception, who whispered that the Beijing delegation had arrived early and was in Conference A with their translator and rehearsed smiles. Celeste had spent 6 months removing the need for the translator and moved through the corridor as if she owned its angles. And to a degree, she did. Hale Morgan Capital had started in a sublet with a wobbly table and a printer that jammed like a bad habit. And now the firm breathed on the 40th floor, where windows framed the city like a promise delivered. Celeste checked the briefing one last time. Her Mandarin notes were tucked between risk and reward clauses and small idioms that made hard men laugh and soften. She liked doing that, turning all the edges into a circle that closed in her favor. The elevator chimed again. Adrian Hale emerged tall, immaculate, and practiced. Silver threaded his dark hair in a way that flattered the years and the cameras. He crossed the marble with the ease of a man accustomed to favorable outcomes, and drew Celeste into a kiss that pretended the room was empty. A few staff pretended not to see. Most failed. Celeste let herself lean into him for a breath. It was a ritual as comfortable as morning coffee. He murmured that she would level the Beijing room the way she leveled every room, and she answered with a slight smile that said confidence without the arrogance. They did not speak the word luck, because they had always insisted they were architects, not lottery winners. Julian arrived with a lacrosse bag slung over one shoulder, and the fast grin of a son who had learned to survive among adults with knives for smiles. He mocked their public affection like teenagers mock sincerity, and hugged them both long enough to betray his relief that love could still look simple in complicated places. The acceptance letter that named his fall destination sat folded in his pocket like a bright ticket. He had come for breakfast, steals, and the comfort of parents who made a spectacle of devotion, and somehow made it look like discipline rather than indulgence. By 9, the office had woken fully. Phones trilled in small, polite bursts. A deal team rolled past with legal binders clipped like shields. The city below sent its usual roar upward through glass that pretended to silence it. Celeste adjusted her hair into an effortless knot and entered Conference A with a greeting in Mandarin that turned the translator into a witness rather than a necessity. She spoke of partnership like an equation that respected both sides. She referenced her spring visit to Chaoyang Park at dawn, when runners stitched the quiet together, and admitted that the kanji at a tiny corner shop had ruined her for hotel breakfasts. The men on the other side of the table smiled at the image, and then smiled again when she disassembled their last demand with 2 numbers and one story about risk tolerance in a bear market. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. When the meeting broke for a pause, Adrian appeared with 2 espressos and a gaze that said he had been listening through the wall and enjoying the show. He told the delegation that Celeste could sell water to rye, and the men laughed because they recognized the truth and appreciated the compliment wrapped in humor. He rested a hand at her waist for a second longer than habit and said that dinner was on him at the new place with the impossible waiting list. Celeste said yes because she enjoyed seeing Julian pretend to be unimpressed by the spectacle, and because every story needs a soft scene before the next hard choice. They were doing what markets do. Back were doing what markets do, swinging between fear and greed like a pendulum powered by caffeine. Celeste checked a dashboard that translated chaos into colors and tiny arrows. She sent 2 notes to risk about position limits and 1 to compliance, mostly a reminder disguised as camaraderie. She returned to the Beijing room and closed the delta between their price and hers with a patient story about reputation and arithmetic. When the last signature landed, she felt the clean click of a plan locking into place. She loved that feeling more than applause. At noon, Julian convinced Adrian to escape for sandwiches in the small park that clung to the tower like a shoulder blade. Celeste joined them for 10 minutes before a partner meeting reclaimed her. They ate at a stone bench warmed by the sun. Adrian bragged about nothing in particular and everything at once, the way he always did when his pride in their son ran out of vocabulary. Celeste watched the two volley lines and thought about the thin ladder they had climbed together, from a leaky sink studio to an office with a private chef they rarely used. She allowed herself a little theater of nostalgia. Ramen on boxes, taping maps to walls, promising each other that the world would bend if they leaned with enough persistence. Afternoon arrived with a cadence of signatures and calendar shifts. The Mumbai expansion came up in the partner meeting, and Adrian championed the bolder timeline than Celeste preferred. She did not undermine him in the room. She raised 3 points that invited revision without public correction, and he accepted 2 with a smile that admitted her aim had been true. Their partnership had always been a choreography of give and take that felt to outsiders like harmony. Sometimes it was harmony. Sometimes it was a truce dressed as music. Celeste believed both could still build a symphony. At 4, she walked the floor alone. She liked the way young analysts straightened when she stopped by their desks. She asked about a footnote he had buried that deserved the light. She assigned a senior to mentor a junior with fire but not yet form. She paused at the glass wall of the small broadcast room where a cable network waited for a quote about inflation and did not go in. Let Adrian take that one. He fed on lights in a way she did not. The day leaned into evening, and the office softened. Staff drifted toward the elevators. The cleaning crew ghosted in with carts that rattled a little. Celeste finished an email to the Beijing team that blended gratitude and terms and forwarded a note to legal about language that needed teeth. She checked a photo on her phone of a blue dress waiting at home and a calendar block named Dinner at Lumiere, spelled with a flourish that tried too hard and succeeded anyway. She liked how the restaurant hid a small dance floor behind a row of palms, and how Adrian always remembered to reserve it for late, when the lights were the correct amount of forgiving. On the drive uptown, they let the car be quiet. The city did what it always does at 6:30. It flowed and honked and glittered in momentary fits. Adrian reached across the console and laced his fingers through hers. He told her that his speech at the upcoming investor summit would be boring until she added the 30 seconds no one would forget. She told him to keep it simple and true, and he laughed because he believed both words could fit him when he chose them. Inkseat, Julian exited with fast thumbs and pretended not to watch his parents be teenagers for a moment. Lumiere glowed in gold and low notes. Adrian had indeed bought out the room because he liked excess best when he could call it romance. They ate slowly. They told an old story about a ruined first date and a dry cleaner who saved a suit from a thunderstorm, and how the laughter after disaster had made everything taste better for a week. They danced on the small patch of floor to a song the band learned during the lean years to humor them and kept in the set because it turned their faces into summer, even in winter. Julian filmed them with a phone he lowered quickly when Celeste saw him. He claimed he would delete it. He would not. On the way home, Celeste rested her head on the window and watched the city move by in broken streams of light. She thought about the house where she still stored the first desk they had shared, because she said it was sentimental, and she did not like discarding proof of origin. She thought about the Beijing closing tomorrow, the speech next week, and how their firm would look 5 years from now if they stayed brave and measured. She thought about the gift she had hidden for Adrian in a closet behind a winter coat, a gift that required a beach and a quiet morning to explain. Julian asked her what made their marriage work when others around him seemed to fail so loudly. Celeste said choice, ritual, and refusal to let contempt into a room. She said respect with boring steadiness and surprise with thoughtful timing. Adrian added luck, after all, leavened though they pretended not to believe in it. Julian laughed, called them insufferable, and leaned forward to squeeze her shoulder as the car turned onto their street. The house opened like a stage on cue, light pooled on the stairs. The scent of roses drifted from a hallway where a small arrangement sat as if it had always lived there. Celeste slipped off her heels and felt the floor give a fraction under her feet, the way a house does when it knows the names of the people living there. She carried the dress upstairs to hang where the night air could cool its fabric, and caught her reflection in the mirror. Not a young woman, and not a tired one. A woman shaped by years of believing that competence is a kind of love. Adrian poured 2 fingers of something amber and complicated, and handed one glass to her as if it were a vow. They stood at the bedroom window and watched the city slowly become a spectacle. He told her he would choose her again tomorrow, just as he had said 10,000 times in smaller ways, and she answered that she would choose him again too, because the ritual kept the walls steady. They set their glasses down in perfect symmetry on the dresser. Celeste checked the alarm for an early start and laid out folders in a stack that put the most urgent and dangerous folders on top, so her hand would find them when she was ready. The last sound before sleep was the slight whisper of the city catching its breath and the soft click of the safe behind winter coats closing on things that mattered. In the morning, she would return to the 40th floor, the Beijing team, and the glow of screens that turned risk into lines and boxes. She would move through a world that still believed in the myth of effort always being rewarded, and she would live inside the version of that myth she and Adrian had built with stubbornness and luck, and a refusal to surrender when surrender would have been stylish. For now, there was a house that felt like home, a son who believed in them, and a husband who kissed her like the day had waited for this exact moment to exhale. The night folded itself neatly around all of it and held. Saturday sunlight bent across the dining room table in long amber stripes that softened everything it touched. Celeste Morgan set the last spoon beside Adrian's plate and adjusted the rice so the jambalaya looked as deliberate as it tasted. Cooking was a language she rarely had time for, but today she wanted the ritual of flame and spice and memory. Adrian liked it plated in a crescent with the sausage crowning the mound like punctuation. She remembered how he used to call her his magician for turning leftovers into feasts when their apartment had been no larger than this table. The house carried a hush that felt like expectation. She walked toward his office with a wineglass in one hand, ready to coax him away from whatever reports had trapped his attention. The door stood slightly open. She pushed it wider, smiling, then froze. Draped over the back of his chair was a silk scarf, burnt orange with a faint pattern of horses. It was unmistakably Hermes, expensive, and absolutely not hers. She stepped closer, lifted it between her fingers, and brought it to her face. The scent was sharp, young, insistent, and foreign. Not the perfume she wore, not the air of their home, but something that did not belong. On the glass desk, a pen rested askew, as though placed down hurriedly. The leather blotter bore a faint mark, like a bracelet had pressed into it, while someone leaned across to write. Celeste's eyes followed the line of the chair, and she found a single hair, almost white blonde, too long to be his, too pale to be hers. It glinted under the office lamp like a minor betrayal caught in the evidence lights. She wrapped it carefully in a tissue, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it in the safe behind her winter coats. Her hands did not tremble, her breath did not change. She moved through the room cataloging details like a forensic pathologist, not a wife. She called upstairs that dinner was ready. Adrian came down a few minutes later with a smile that reached his eyes, or at least pretended to. He kissed her cheek, complimented the smell, poured them both wine, and launched into a story about a stubborn partner resisting a merger clause. Celeste listened, nodding at the proper intervals, tucking away every syllable for later. She looked at him across the table, at the man who had shared every stage of her life from hunger to plenty, and wondered how easily one learns to perform devotion. That evening, they curled on the couch, Adrian's head heavy in her lap, pride and prejudice flickering across the screen. She stroked his hair as if tracing each moment of their years together. Yet her mind replayed the scarf, the perfume, the hair. He fell asleep before the first ball scene ended. She watched him, mouth slightly parted, his features softened by dreams, and thought about logistics. Love did not vanish overnight. It receded with deliberation, like a tide calculating its retreat. Her chest did not ache. Her mind planned. The next morning, she woke before him, poured coffee in 2 cups, added the oat milk and sugars as he liked them, and carried his into the bathroom, where steam clung to the mirror. She kissed his damp shoulder and pretended not to notice the faint cologne clinging beneath the scent of soap, a brand she had not bought him. She catalogued it as another entry in a growing ledger. On his hip, when he stepped out of the shower, she saw a shadow bruise shaped like a thumbprint. She smiled, asked nothing, and handed him his tie. Julian wandered in at breakfast, eyeing the two of them with suspicion. He called their morning cheer strange, exaggerated, and weird. Celeste tousled his hair and laughed it off, while Adrian asked her an unspoken question. She let her eyes answer with calm warmth, the mask he would never suspect. By the afternoon, Celeste had already spoken with Elise Rios over a cappuccino at a discreet cafe where partners never dared bring their clients. Elise listened without interruption, her eyes steady, then slid a card across the table. Chloe Evans, discreet, precise, thorough. Celeste accepted it, finished her cappuccino, and left a larger tip than usual. That night, she kissed Adrian goodnight as though nothing had shifted. Yet she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, seeing instead the pale hair gleaming under the desk lamp. Betrayal was a language she would not pretend not to speak. Tomorrow would begin the first sentence of her response. Monday dawned with a sky of the color of steel, and the city answered with its usual orchestra of horns and hurried footsteps. Celeste woke before Adrian and lay still, her mind replaying the scarf, perfume, and pale strand of hair. She rose quietly, slipped into her robe, and brewed the coffee he liked best, the Ethiopian blend with oat milk and 2 sugars. When he walked into the kitchen, she handed it to him with a smile so serene it could have been carved from marble. He kissed her cheek, murmured thanks, and never saw the calculation flicker behind her eyes. They showered together for the first time in months. The water steamed around them, hiding the quiet scrutiny she conducted. On his shoulder, a faint scratch lingered, almost healed. On his hip, the bruise had deepened to a darker purple. She traced it with a fingertip, laughing softly when he claimed it was from the gym. She catalogued the lie without blinking. The scent of unfamiliar cologne clung faintly to his neck, and she tucked that away too. The performance continued smoothly, her body fluid with affection, her eyes sharp with inventory. At breakfast, Julian studied them with suspicion. He poked at his eggs and asked why they suddenly acted like newlyweds. Celeste ruffled his hair and told him love deserved rehearsal as much as sport did. Adrian laughed and wrapped an arm around her waist to prove the point. Julian rolled his eyes but lingered, sensing a shift he could not yet name. Celeste held her son's gaze a heartbeat longer, silently telling him not to worry. He would learn the truth soon enough, but not yet. By mid-morning, she stood at Adrian's side in the partners' meeting, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. She listened as he spoke passionately about accelerating the Mumbai expansion, his voice full of charisma, his gestures sharp. When the board hesitated, she interjected at precise intervals, not to contradict but to guide, smoothing rough edges, framing his boldness as vision tempered by wisdom. The room nodded, persuaded. Adrian glanced at her with gratitude and pride. She kissed his temple as they left, the gesture staged perfectly for an audience. To them, it looked like loyalty. To her, it was a cover. In the afternoon, he lunched with Elise Rios at a quiet restaurant where the music played loud enough to mask conversation. Elise asked no frivolous questions. She slid a slim folder across the table, inside of which was a name, a phone number, and a reputation. Chloe Evans. Discreet, efficient, relentless. A private investigator who left no trails except the ones she uncovered. Celeste sipped her sparkling water and nodded. Elise squeezed her hand, an unspoken solidarity between women who had seen too many betrayals dressed in expensive suits. Celeste thanked her and walked out with the calm of a general securing her first ally. By evening, Chloe sat across from her in the library, a quiet figure in a dark blazer, eyes sharp with focus. She asked for the boundaries of her search. Celeste gave her none. Follow the money, the travel, the shadows. Document everything. Leave nothing unrecorded. Chloe agreed with a slight nod and promised weekly updates. She left as quietly as she had arrived, carrying the first threads of a net that would soon close around Adrian Hale. That night, Celeste poured Adrian a glass of wine and curled against him on the couch. She listened as he spoke of quarterly forecasts, regulatory murmurs, and how the markets trembled at whispers. She smiled at the right moments, laughed when he did, pressed her hand against his chest as if to steady his heart. He believed in the mask completely. He fell asleep with his head against her shoulder, his breath even and trusting. She kissed his hair, her face unreadable in the lamp's glow. When he finally fell asleep, she rose, took her phone, and padded to the study. She opened the safe, withdrew the envelope with the pale hair, and laid it beside her notebook. She wrote down every detail she had gathered: the scarf, the cologne, the scratch, the bruise, the hours he claimed to be elsewhere. Each line was crisp, unemotional, precise. She closed the notebook, locked it in the safe again, and stood looking out the window at the city lights. Her reflection in the glass was calm, controlled, unbroken. She thought about how masks were not merely worn for others. They were shields forged for survival, for strategy, for power. And hers would not slip. Not yet. Julian Hale did not go to Noah's house that Tuesday night, though he had promised his father he would. Instead, he lingered at the curb, phone in hand, watching the pattern of lights across the windows of their home. He noted the way the study lamp flickered on at 9, off again at 10, back on near midnight. He noticed his mother's silhouette crossing from room to room, steady and deliberate, like someone pacing before a trial. He stayed in the shadows of the jacaranda tree, unsure why suspicion coiled in his chest, but unwilling to ignore it. Inside, Celeste sat at her desk with 3 laptops open before her. One belonged to the household, one to the firm, and one was freshly purchased that morning with cash and no questions. The glow from their screens turned her face pale, sharp, almost spectral. She moved between them with practiced calm. Passwords Adrian had let slip in careless moments fell into place. Joint accounts revealed themselves with startling ease, as if the doors had never truly been locked. The numbers were ordinary at first: transfers, household expenses, charitable donations. Then came the irregularities, buried in timing and repetition. She leaned closer. The Carlisle, room 1247. A day rate matched 2 weekends when Adrian claimed to be in Chicago. Receipts for jewelry were never delivered to her. Restaurant bills were signed in his hand, for tables of 2, on days she knew she was continents away. The data unfolded like a map of betrayal, every line item a breadcrumb toward someone else's smile. She did not cry, she documented. Her fingers moved with precision, saving, printing, filing, each keystroke another stitch in a net she would someday cast. Julian entered quietly, his steps hesitant. He stopped in the doorway and watched her work, realizing in a rush that his mother was not simply organizing finances. She was investigating. She turned to him without surprise, as if she had known he would come. She gestured for him to sit. He did, his throat tight, waiting for her to explain. She did not waste words. "Your father is having an affair." The sentence was delivered with the same calm she used when explaining market risk, measured and undeniable. Julian's chest constricted, the room tilting for a moment. He wanted to shout, demand proof, and insist it was impossible. Instead, he listened as she slid the printed pages across the desk. Hotel logs, credit card slips, digital transfers to a woman named Sienna Clark, Venmo notes with coy emojis that meant everything they pretended not to. The world he had built around his father's image fractured, hairline cracks spreading like lightning through glass. His stomach lurched, and he barely made it to the bathroom before he vomited. When he returned, pale and shaken, Celeste was waiting. She touched his shoulder, her hand steady even as his trembled. "I need your help," she said, "but you must be careful. No one can know, not yet." He nodded, swallowing hard. He understood now that childhood had ended in that room, at that desk, with that truth. He would carry the weight of secrets from this night forward. Together, they sifted deeper into the digital shadows. Julian, more fluent in the language of social media than his mother, traced Sienna's Instagram, her tagged photos, the carefully curated life of a woman who lived in a Tribeca apartment her salary could not sustain. He showed Celeste the patterns of posts, the expensive dinners, the weekends at hotels that coincided too neatly with Adrian's sudden business trips. They matched timestamps with credit card slips, triangulating infidelity with a precision that felt both cruel and necessary. At 2 in the morning, they sat in the marina parking lot, engine off, the sea stretching black and endless before them. They had carefully followed Adrian's car earlier that evening, with their headlights dimmed at a distance. They had watched him step out, open the passenger door, and offer his hand to Sienna Clark, who emerged with a laugh too loud for the quiet night. They had seen him lead her into the summer house by the dunes, where Julian had learned to swim, where birthdays had been celebrated, where every corner held family memories. He had given it away without hesitation. Celeste did not weep. She lifted her phone, recorded the time, the place, and the plates. Evidence. Julian sat beside her, fists clenched, eyes burning, the betrayal scorching through him. On the drive home, he asked if she hated his father. She answered with the same calm as before. "Hate is wasteful. I prefer justice." Julian staggered to the lawn when Wend was sick again. Celeste stood beside him, holding his back, murmuring steady words. Then she guided him inside, sat him at the kitchen table, and poured him water. She opened her notebook and began to list the following steps: offshore transfers, shell corporations, partners who might be swayed, and attorneys who could be trusted. She sketched it like a battle plan, each line a path to leverage, each page a promise that betrayal would not stand unchallenged. The night ended with Julian in his room, staring at the ceiling, hearing again the laugh of the stranger who had stepped into his family's house as though it were hers. Celeste remained downstairs, her pen moving long after the house had gone quiet, drafting the architecture of retribution with the patience of an engineer. Outside, the city slept. Inside, mother and son entered a new alliance, bound by silence, sharpened by betrayal, ready to follow every shadow until the truth stood in light. The summer house stood at the edge of the dunes like a secret carved into weathered wood and glass. For years, it had been the family's refuge, where birthdays spilled into late-night swims, where Julian had taken his first faltering strokes in the pool while his father filmed and his mother cheered. It was a place layered with laughter and candlelight, with photographs still hidden in drawers and initials carved into the wood of the gazebo. It was theirs, or so Celeste had always believed, until she watched her husband offer its sanctity to another woman. She and Julian parked far back among the dunes where shadows stretched long in the moonlight. They sat silently in the car, the only sound being the steady rhythm of the sea and Julian's quickening breath. From their vantage point, they saw the sweep of headlights, then the unmistakable shape of Adrian's Bentley gliding along the narrow road like a predator returning to its den. The car stopped before the house, polished chrome flashing once in the dark before dimming. The driver's door opened. Adrian stepped out, suit jacket draped carelessly over one arm, and walked around to open the passenger side. A woman emerged, slender, dark-haired, dressed in a silk dress that seemed made for evenings like this. She laughed too loudly for the stillness, her voice carrying across the sand to where Celeste and Julian waited. Adrian leaned close, his hand at the small of her back, guiding her with the familiarity of someone who had done so many times. Together, they walked up the wooden steps and disappeared into the house, where every wall carried a memory that belonged to another family. Julian's hands clenched in his lap. He could not breathe. He had spent summers here, racing his father across the lawn, helping his mother string lights on the porch. Seeing it now, occupied by a stranger's perfume and laughter, felt like sacrilege. His stomach lurched, bile rising, and Celeste reached over, resting a firm hand on his arm. "Breathe," she whispered, "just breathe." Her voice carried none of the rage burning inside her. She was cold, steady, calculating. They stayed in the car for over an hour, watching the silhouettes move behind the drawn curtains. The pool lights flicked on, glowing turquoise, illuminating shadows that danced too close to each other. Celeste did not flinch. She lifted her phone and recorded the times, the images, the license plates. She treated it like evidence, not heartbreak. Julian turned his face away, unwilling to watch more, his shoulders trembling in silent fury. When at last they drove home, the road stretched empty before them. Julian could not contain it any longer. How could he bring her there, he demanded, his voice cracking. How could he show her our house, our place? Celeste kept her eyes on the road, her hands steady on the wheel. Because he believes nothing sacred can be taken from him, she answered. Because he thinks no one will ever hold him accountable. Her words were calm, but her eyes glittered in the reflection of the dashboard lights. Back at the city house, Julian stumbled onto the lawn and was sick in the grass, his grief and fury spilling out of him. Celeste stood beside him, one hand on his back, waiting until the storm passed. She guided him inside, poured him a glass of water, and pressed it into his shaking hands. She did not attempt to soften the truth. This is who he has become, she said. We cannot change that, but we can decide what comes next. Julian looked at her, pale and shaken, his eyes searching hers for some fragment of comfort. He found none, only resolve. What do we do? He whispered. She opened her notebook, placed it on the table, and began to write. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, partners with grudges. She outlined a plan with the precision of a general sketching a battlefield. Julian watched as each line formed, realizing his mother was not simply surviving betrayal. She was preparing for war. That night, long after Julian had gone to bed, Celeste sat alone in the kitchen, the notebook open before her. She thought about the gazebo where she and Adrian had once renewed their vows under fairy lights, the pool that reflected Julian's laughter, and the walls that still carried the scent of summers gone. She thought about how Adrian had taken it all and given it to another. She let herself feel the pain for one moment, just one, and then she closed the notebook. Pain would not undo what had been done. Only precision would, only justice. The house at the edge of the sea was no longer theirs, but it would be the site of his undoing. The following Monday dawned without softness. Celeste was already in Harold Stone's office by 8:30, seated in a leather chair that had heard several betrayals and would hear 100 more. Harold was a divorce attorney of legend who wore patience like armor and strategy like breath. He flipped through the file Chloe had compiled, his expression tightening only once when he reached the section on offshore transfers. He looked up at Celeste with eyes that did not pity, only calculated. You own 40%, he said. He owns 40. The rest is scattered among minor shareholders who would sell their loyalty for the right price or reason. If you can shift 11%, you control the company. The fraud gives you leverage. The affair provides you with optics. Both together give you the upper hand. Celeste leaned back, fingers steepled. What do I need to do? He smiled faintly. Build allies, accumulate proxies. Andy is ready to strike when the audience is large. She left his office with more than counsel. She went with a plan. The first visit was to Genevieve Archer, an heiress who held 6% of the firm through family trusts. Genevieve lived in a penthouse filled with orchids and old money, quiet. Celeste brought no documents, only candor. She spoke of Adrian's recklessness, of the siphoned million of the looming federal interest. Genevieve listened, her expression cool, and then she delicately touched one of her orchids. I always told him arrogance would be his downfall. You, on the other hand, have never wasted time on arrogance. You have my vote. Next was Conrad Blake, who had once been Adrian's ally and now was his casualty. Recently divorced, embittered, and eager for revenge, he welcomed Celeste with a tumbler of scotch and a grin too wide. She showed him the truth of offshore accounts, these filings, and the betrayal of marriage and fiduciary duty. Conrad laughed, loud and bitter. I always wanted to watch him choke on his own brilliance. Tell me when and where to raise my hand. Nathan Caldwell was harder, a quiet man with a ledger full of numbers and grudges. Adrian had dismissed him one too many times, mocked his caution, and ignored his advice. Celeste came armed with arithmetic, showing him how Adrian's siphoning had undercut the long-term stability Nathan cared for. She did not appeal to revenge, only to logic. Nathan adjusted his glasses, studied the spreadsheets, and finally nodded. Stability matters more than vanity. I will stand with you. Even assistant Maya Lin idly held 1% in deferred stock. Maya had always been observant, but her silence was mistaken for deference. Celeste invited her for tea, asked gentle questions, listened as Maya confessed she had long suspected but never had the evidence. When Celeste showed her the proof, Maya's hands shook slightly, then steadied. He has treated me like furniture for years. You, on the other hand, see me. I am with you. Piece by piece, the allies formed. Celeste felt the weight shift, the arithmetic bending in her favor. Every conversation was another thread tied into the net she was weaving. Every agreement was another step toward leverage. At night, she and Julian reviewed the progress at the dining table, papers spread out like maps before a campaign. He watched with awe as his mother transformed betrayal into strategy, pain into precision. He asked how she remained so calm. She answered that emotion clouds judgment, and judgment is the only weapon worth wielding. By the end of the week, Harold's team had drafted bylaws revisions disguised as modernization. Proxy statements were prepared, and shareholder votes were quietly secured. The stage would be set, not at a board meeting in some sterile room, but at an event designed for spectacle, an anniversary celebration where the city's eyes would already be watching. Celeste looked over the plans, the arithmetic, the allies she had gathered. Adrian believed himself untouchable, the architect of a kingdom only he could rule. But numbers, once shifted, once aligned, did not thick. When the vote came, it would be numbers, not charm, that decided his fate. The text arrived Wednesday afternoon while Celeste reviewed a contract in her office. It was from an unknown number, but the tone was unmistakably female, sharp and confident. I know about you. Meet me. The message pulsed on her screen like a challenge, and Celeste did not hesitate. She replied with a time and place, choosing the cafe at Bergdorf where conversations were always overheard but never repeated. When she arrived, Sienna was perfectly styled in a pale dress that suggested youth and ease. Her eyes were restless, though, scanning the room, betraying nerves beneath the glamour. Celeste set her bag down, ordered tea, and studied the woman who had taken what was not hers. Sienna broke the silence first. He says he is leaving you. He says I am his future. Celeste smiled gently, almost pityingly. He has said that before. She replied to others who looked like you, who believed just as fiercely. He does not leave, he collects. And when he is bored, he replaces. The words landed precisely, cutting past the bravado to the fear beneath. Sienna's jaw tightened. You are lying. Celeste leaned closer, her voice calm. No, I am instructing. You think you have won a prize, but you have been placed in a pattern, one that repeats. When you are done, another will sit across from me, believing as you do now. She left the rest unsaid, letting silence finish the lesson. They parted with no agreement or resolution, only the seed of doubt planted where vanity once lived. Celeste returned to the car with Chloe's latest envelope in her bag. Inside were photographs too sharp to deny. Adrian and Sienna are in the hallway of the Carlisle. Kisses in the elevator, room numbers visible, timestamps matching receipts. High-resolution proof that love could be quantified into betrayal. That evening, Celeste poured herself a martini and positioned herself where the hotel cameras would catch her. She was poised and elegant, marking her presence in the narrative. Across town, Dad Adrian and Sienna shared a bottle of wine, unaware of the camera's silent witness. When Adrian returned home, Celeste warmly greeted him, congratulated him on the Harrison meeting he had never attended, and kissed him softly. However, his mouth still carried the trace of someone else's perfume. Later, when he fell asleep, she opened Chloe's folder again, spread the images across her desk, and studied them like art pieces. Not because she needed proof of what she already knew, but because she understood the value of documentation. In her world, truth only mattered when it could be displayed, dated, witnessed, and undeniable. The lesson for Sienna would take time to root, but Celeste knew seeds grew best in silence. She did not rage, she did not confront. She built, one careful move at a time, while the other woman began to feel the weight of a future that was not as certain as she had believed. Celeste closed the folder, locked it in the safe, and turned out the light. Her mask remained intact. Her strategy remained unbroken. The game was no longer private. It was becoming theater. And she was writing the script. 5 days before the anniversary gala, Celeste stood in the St. Regis ballroom with her event coordinator, every detail unfolding exactly as she had imagined during sleepless nights. The chandeliers threw fractured light across the polished marble, and beneath them, teams of florists constructed gardens of white roses that spilled like rivers across the room. The orchestra tuned quietly in a corner, their instruments promising elegance while Celeste measured each sound against the silence that would soon follow Adrian's ruin. She instructed the technicians to enlarge the projection screens. "Every guest must see," she said, her voice calm, deliberate. Nothing hidden, nothing ambiguous. The coordinator hesitated, remarking that it was unusually dramatic for a vow renewal tribute. Celeste's lips curved into the faintest smile. "My husband deserves drama," she replied. "He has written a lifetime of it for me." Later that day, she met Thomas Bennett in his office, a space lined with leather and glass that smelled faintly of old battles fought and won. He slid a folder across the desk. "Divorce petitions, fraud complaints, shareholder agreements. All ready to deploy the moment you give the word," he said. Celeste leafed through the pages slowly, her eyes grazing signatures and seals that felt like weapons and absolution. "Are you prepared for the public cost?" Thomas asked. "The humiliation that comes with this scale of spectacle." "Public is the point," she answered. "Private was where he betrayed me. The public is where he will be buried." At home, Adrian noticed the increased pace of preparations. Their dining table was covered in swatches of fabric, place cards, menu tastings, and floral samples. He picked up one of the embossed invitations and ran his thumb over the golden letters. "It seems elaborate, even for us," he remarked. Celeste looked up from her notebook and said, "20 years only happens once. I want it flawless." He smiled, kissed her cheek, and said, "Everything you touch turns flawless." She returned the kiss with a warmth rehearsed to perfection. Marcus grew quieter as the days advanced, shadows under his eyes betraying sleepless nights spent helping technicians calibrate the video systems. In the evenings, they sat together in the pool house, rehearsing the sequence of revelations, ensuring every timestamp, every receipt, every photo aligned in devastating clarity. Marcus asked once if this was too far. Perhaps they could end it with divorce and silence. Celeste placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Silence is mercy." He chose betrayal instead. "We answer in kind." 3 days before the party, Vanessa arrived uninvited at Celeste's office, her makeup heavy enough to mask exhaustion, but not despair. Her words tumbled out in a rush. "I need to know," she said. "Are you really going to destroy him?" Celeste folded her hands, studied her for a long moment, and said, "Yes." "Why warn me then?" Vanessa asked, her voice breaking. "Because you are collateral, not the target. But even collateral deserves a chance to step aside." Then Vanessa whispered the secret she had carried for days. "I am pregnant, 6 weeks." Celeste felt the world tilt, but her face did not betray the earthquake within. "Does Adrian know?" she asked. Vanessa nodded. "He told me to end it. Said the timing was wrong. Said after the divorce we could try again." Celeste's lips curved, though the smile held no joy. "There is no divorce," she said. "He was never leaving me. He only ever planned to abandon you when it became inconvenient." For the first time, Celeste surprised even herself. "Keep the child if you wish," she said. "I will ensure you are provided for." "Why would you do that?" Vanessa whispered, tears blurring her mascara. "Because the child did not choose this," Celeste answered, "and because Adrian must live with consequences that stretch 18 years beyond this night." On the morning of the gala, Celeste rose at dawn, the city still half asleep, and prepared breakfast for her family like any other day. French toast with strawberries, Adrian's favorite, and coffee strong enough to hide the taste of deceit. He watched her hum while she cooked, oblivious, reassured by the performance. "You are in a good mood," he said. "Why wouldn't I be?" Celeste replied. "Tonight we celebrate 20 years of marriage, a son about to leave for Colombia, and a company thriving. It is a perfect day." By afternoon, the house filled with stylists and florists, hairdressers and seamstresses moving like ants in a colony preparing for a storm. Celeste sat before the mirror, her black gown threaded with gold that caught the light like armor. The diamond necklace Adrian had given her gleaming at her throat like a chain disguised as stars. The makeup artist whispered, "You look like a queen." Celeste nodded. Queens are the most powerful pieces on the board. Adrian emerged in his tuxedo, still devastatingly handsome in a way that would always disarm strangers. He paused at the sight of her, eyes softened. "You are breathtaking." "Save your breath," Celeste murmured. "You will need it for your speech." In the car, Marcus tapped furiously at his phone, confirming with technicians, adjusting final cues. Adrian glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Nervous about Colombia, son?" Marcus only nodded. Celeste reached for her son's hand discreetly, squeezed once, a reminder that their pact remained unbroken. The ballroom was transformed into a wonderland of roses and crystal, their wedding photo enlarged at the entrance, guests arriving in waves of silk and jewels. Society figures whispered admiration at the display, mistaking spectacle for devotion. Adrian shook hands, told stories, and played his role to perfection. Celeste stayed beside him, her smile flawless, her hand resting lightly on his arm, the picture of a devoted wife. At 9:15, Adrian raised his glass, and the room hushed. He began to speak of love, of partnership, of devotion. His words dripped with sincerity, polished by years of practice. He fell to one knee before her, producing a ring, asking her to marry him again, to give him 20 more years. The crowd erupted in applause, women dabbed their eyes, and men nodded in approval. Celeste bent toward him, allowed the ring to slide onto her finger, and whispered, "I will give you precisely what you deserve." At 9:47, the lights dimmed. Marcus stood taller, the laptop balanced in his hands. Celeste's voice, steady and strong, filled the silence. "Tonight," she said, "we celebrate 20 years. Long enough to build, long enough to raise a son, long enough to discover truth." The first image flickered onto the screens, a hotel receipt, dated and signed. Then another, then photographs. Gasps rippled like shockwaves. Celeste raised her glass, her smile sharp as a blade. "To truth," she said, and the truth roared across the ballroom, unstoppable, undeniable. Adrian stumbled forward, eyes wide, lips shaping pleas drowned by the crowd's whispers. Marcus stepped between them, his jaw set. "Do not," he told his father. "This is not your moment anymore." The stage was set, the empire was trembling, and Celeste, radiant in black and gold, stood at the center, calm as a queen at checkmate, watching the final act of her husband's illusion collapse beneath the weight of truth. The ballroom darkened at exactly 9:47, every chandelier dimming until 200 of New York's most powerful figures sat in a velvet hush. Glasses paused mid-air, conversations cut short. The music dissolved into silence. The giant screens flared to life on cue, flooding the room with an intimate image that should have belonged to a family album. Adrian and Celeste's wedding day. The bride was radiant in lace, the groom grinning with unguarded joy. For a heartbeat, the guests sighed, believing this was another chapter of the perfect love story. Then Celeste's voice, steady and cold, rose above the silence. 20 years ago, I believed in forever. Tonight, I show you what forever has become. The screen shifted. A hotel receipt appeared, neatly dated, signed, impossible to explain away. Murmurs erupted across the tables. Another receipt followed, then another, each building the cadence of betrayal. Dates scrolled like a metronome marking the death of devotion. Gasps multiplied when photographs replaced receipts. Adrian, unmistakable in his tailored suits, was entering the Carlisle. Adrian kisses Sienna in the hallway. Adrian, with his hand on her back, his ring glinting under the sterile light of the elevator. The clarity of the images was brutal. No grain, no blur, only sharp betrayal carved into every pixel. Adrian's glass slipped from his hand and shattered, but no one moved to help him. He stumbled toward Celeste, his lips forming protests, but Marcus stepped forward, tall and resolute, blocking him. "Do not," Marcus said, his voice amplified by the microphone at his side. "This is not your moment." The son's rejection hung heavier than the evidence on the screen. Celeste's voice returned, controlled as ever. "Hotels were foreplay," she said. "Here is the climax." Jewelry receipts flooded the screens. Diamonds and gold stacked like an inventory of deception. Cartier, Tiffany, Harry Winston. Tens of thousands poured into the hands of a woman who believed she was cherished. The camera caught Vanessa at table 12. Her face collapsed, the truth devouring the last of her illusions. Then came the recordings. Adrian's voice, lifted from emails and messages, looped through the speakers. "Be patient, baby. Once the money is secure, we are gone. Miami, fresh start. Celeste is boring anyway. Obligation." She let the word linger, tasting it like venom on her tongue. 20 years, a son, an empire, all reduced to obligation. The screens shifted again, showing transfers, wire trails, accounts in the Cayman Islands. 70 million siphoned in secret. At the back of the room, Thomas Bennett stood, announcing in his measured tone that the FBI and IRS had been notified. Adrian's knees buckled. The crowd, once envious of his empire, now recoiled as if fraud itself were contagious. Still, Celeste was not finished. She displayed a gallery of past betrayals. Lauren in 2019, Nicole in 2016, Rachel in 2014. Each faces a ghost of promises recycled. The room hissed with disbelief. Adrian broke then, shouting, "Celeste, stop this." But her reply cut deeper than any document. "Did you stop when you defiled our home with another woman?" Her profanity cracked the last of her composed image, and the effect was nuclear. Finally, she turned to Vanessa. "Tell them," she commanded. Vanessa rose on trembling legs. "I am pregnant," she whispered, 6 weeks. "He wanted me to end it, said the timing was wrong. Told after the divorce we could try again." The room erupted, a storm of whispers and condemnation. Victoria Peterson stood, her pearls catching the light like a verdict. "I motion that Adrian Brooks be removed as CEO, effective immediately." Hands shot up across the room. Investors, board members, allies turning with the tide. Daniel Foster seconded. The motion carried, 63% in favor. Adrian's empire slipped away in the space of one vote. Adrian staggered, reaching for Celeste. "Please, do not touch me," she hissed, stepping back. She slid her rings from her finger and dropped them into his abandoned champagne flute. "Give those to your next victim." Then she leaned close enough for the microphone to capture every word. 3 months, I smiled while you betrayed me. For 3 months, I gathered evidence while you gathered disease. I played the perfect wife while you played the perfect fool. Marcus moved forward, his eyes blazing. Every email, every text, every lie, I have them all. I chose her. I chose honor. Everything you pretended to teach but never practiced. Adrian choked out, "I am your father." Marcus's reply was colder than winter. "You are nothing. A donor. A liar. A coward." Mother and son turned together and walked down the aisle between tables, the crowd parting as before royalty. Behind them, Adrian stood alone, the screens still looping his betrayals, his empire collapsing. Victoria intercepted them at the door, murmuring, "Magnificent, darling. Brutal, but magnificent. Necessary." Celeste answered, her face serene. In the car, Marcus laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "He renewed his vows an hour before you destroyed him." Shakespearean. Celeste's eyes glinted in the streetlights. "Shakespeare killed everyone. I only killed his future." Back at the house, she found the note he had left that morning, written in his careful hand. "Can't wait for tonight. All my love, A." She burned it over the kitchen sink, watching the flames consume his words until only ash remained. Her phone vibrated, missed calls piling in. CNN, The Times, The Journal. Reporters are hungry for the story, already racing across social media. She turned the phone face down, poured wine, and sat beside Marcus in the silence of their reclaimed home. "Did he ever love us?" Marcus asked quietly. Celeste placed her hand on his. "He loved the idea of us, but real love requires sacrifice, and Adrian was never capable of that." They watched the first light of morning spill across Manhattan, painting the skyline in gold. "We won," Marcus whispered. "No," Celeste corrected. "We survived. That is better." The empire of illusion was gone. Something more challenging, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous had risen in its place. Celeste lifted her glass to the sunrise. The queen had taken the king. The board was cleared. The game was hers. The morning after the gala carried no softness, only the metallic aftermath taste. Celeste woke in the silence of her bedroom, the city outside already pulsing with sirens and headlines. Her phone buzzed endlessly on the nightstand. A flood of calls from networks, magazines, newspapers, and acquaintances who had once whispered admiration for Adrian and sought fresh scandal from his ruin. She ignored them all. She rose, showered, dressed in a charcoal suit, and walked into the kitchen where Marcus sat with a cup of coffee untouched before him. He looked older than his years, shadows under his eyes carved by the spectacle of the night before. He lifted his gaze when she entered. "They are saying it everywhere," he murmured. "Not just here. London, Hong Kong, Dubai. It is global." Celeste poured herself tea, stirring slowly. "Good, let it spread. Ashes cannot return to embers once the world has stomped them out." By noon, she sat in the office conference room, surrounded by allies whose shares now placed control firmly in her hands. Genevieve Archer arrived in pearls, her orchid perfume trailing authority. Conrad Blake leaned back with satisfaction, sipping scotch though it was barely midday. Nathan Caldwell arrived last, cautious but steady, and nodded at Celeste respectfully. She opened the meeting with no preamble. "Adrian Hale Brooks is removed. By shareholder vote and by public disgrace, his reign is finished. From today forward, Hale Morgan Capital answers to reason, not vanity." Resolutions were signed, motions carried, and documents notarized. Each stroke of the pen further erased Adrian from the empire he had once claimed as his alone. Reporters clamored for statements outside the conference room, but Celeste dismissed them with silence. She understood that words given too soon could cheapen the precision of her work. She would speak when it mattered, not when the mob demanded. In the evening, as dusk wrapped itself around the skyline, she returned home to find Adrian waiting on the steps of their house. His tuxedo from the gala hung wrinkled on his frame, his tie gone, his eyes red with sleeplessness. Celeste stopped at the curb, studying him like a stranger loitering on her property. He staggered forward. "Please," he said, voice hoarse, "you cannot do this to me." Her reply was clean, without hesitation. "I did not do this to you, you did." She stepped past him, keys already in hand. He grabbed her wrist, but Marcus appeared instantly in the doorway, fury crackling in his eyes. "Let go," Marcus said. His father hesitated, then released her as though the touch had burned. After locking the doors and drawing the curtains that night, Celeste lit a fire in the hearth. She brought out the last remnants of their marriage, cards written in his careful hand, old photographs, love notes he had once slipped into her briefcase. She fed them one by one into the flames. Marcus watched silently, understanding without words that this was not destruction, but cleansing. The next morning, the financial pages ran the story on every cover. Adrian Hale Brooks disgraced, fraud allegations, infidelity scandal, CEO removed, FBI investigation imminent. Stock prices dipped, then steadied under Celeste's assurance. She addressed the staff in a measured voice, promising transparency, stability, and strength. Applause followed, tentative and swelling as people realized she had not merely survived but ascended. Vanessa called later, her voice trembling. "He has been calling me nonstop. He says he loves me. He says he wants to fix it." Celeste listened, then said softly, "You have your answer already." The child deserves better than a man who abandons truth as easily as he abandons women. Vanessa began to cry, but Celeste did not waver. She knew mercy had its place, but clarity was more important. By week's end, Adrian had vanished from the headlines, replaced by fresher scandals. Yet the ruins of his life lingered. His accounts frozen, his allies scattered, his reputation shredded. He called Celeste once more, his voice a rasp on the line. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. She answered without hesitation, "I loved the man you pretended to be." When she hung up, she felt no triumph, no regret. Only the weight of truth, heavy but liberating. The embers of their life together were gone, cold and gray. In their place, she saw not ruin but space, space to rebuild, redefine, and rise without the chains of his deceit. She closed her notebook, turned out the light, and sat quietly. For the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. The weeks after the gala unfolded like a slow unspooling of threads, some snapping violently, others weaving into new patterns Celeste had not yet imagined. She moved through her days with deliberate calm, as though walking across glass she herself had shattered. The city still buzzed with the memory of her public reckoning, but Celeste understood better than anyone, and that shock faded quickly. Power, however, lingered. Power was not in spectacle alone, but in what followed after the lights dimmed. At Hale Morgan Capital, the halls were quieter, voices hushed with awe or fear. Staff members who had once orbited Adrian with obsequious loyalty now leaned toward Celeste, their eyes betraying relief and uncertainty. She addressed them directly in the glass atrium, where sunlight slanted like a benediction. She spoke of stability, integrity, and building trust, not through grand illusions, but through discipline. Her words did not soar, they grounded, and in grounding, they steadied. Applause rose slowly, cautious at first, then with conviction. For the first time in years, the firm did not feel like a temple to ego, but a company with purpose. Yet fractures remained. In private, board members whispered about reputational risk, about whether a woman who had annihilated her husband in public could command long-term investor faith. Some admired her ruthlessness, others recoiled. Celeste knew perception mattered as much as balance sheets. She courted both Wall Street and Main Street with equal precision. She invited journalists into her office, not to recount the scandal, but to frame the future. She told them that we will not be known by betrayal, but by resilience. She let them photograph her at her desk with files open, the image of order restored. At home, Marcus struggled with shadows that did not fade as easily. His laughter came less often, and his eyes carried the weight of what he had seen. He had witnessed not just his father's betrayal, but his mother's cold response. And though he admired her strength, he also feared it. One evening, he asked her quietly, "Did you ever want to just run away instead of fighting?" She considered before answering. "Every day, but running away leaves the enemy intact. Fighting ends the cycle." He nodded, though the answer did not soothe him. It reminded him of the cost. Adrian had vanished from the city, retreating into obscurity. Rumors swirled of him renting a small apartment under a different name, of late nights in anonymous bars, of failed attempts to contact old allies who now treated him like an outcast. The FBI inquiry had begun, agents quietly collecting documents, tracing transfers, interviewing partners. Celeste followed the reports but did not interfere. The machine of justice was grinding slowly, but she had already delivered the mortal wound. Vanessa remained a complication Celeste could not entirely ignore. She was fragile, frightened, still carrying Adrian's child inside her. Celeste met her once in a discreet clinic, away from cameras. Vanessa asked why she had been spared humiliation, and Celeste had not destroyed her alongside Adrian. Celeste answered with rare softness, "Because destruction multiplies if left unchecked. I wanted him undone, not you. You were only a symptom." Vanessa wept, clutching her abdomen, and Celeste rested a hand briefly on her shoulder before leaving. She could offer no more than that moment of grace. At night, Celeste walked through the empty rooms of her home, touching the edges of furniture, the corners of photographs, the spaces where laughter once resided. She wondered if victory always tasted this hollow. She asked if vengeance ever ended, or if it simply left survivors haunted by its echo. Yet she did not regret. Regret, she reminded herself, was a luxury afforded only to those who could not afford consequences. One evening she stood at the window overlooking the city, and Marcus joined her. The lights stretched endlessly, a constellation built by ambition and ruin. He slipped his hand into hers, no longer a child's gesture, but the solidarity of equals. "We survived," he said. She nodded, eyes fixed on the skyline. Yes, but survival is only the beginning. Fractures ran through every part of their lives now. Family, company, friendships, once thought unshakable. Yet foundations remained too. Trust between mother and son, control of the empire. A name that, though scarred, still commanded attention. From these, Celeste knew she would build again, stronger, sharper, less fragile. She had lived through betrayal and spectacle. What came next would be something colder, something enduring. She whispered to herself in the house's silence, not as confession, but as a vow. "I am not finished, not yet." The first winter snow arrived quietly, blanketing the city in white-like. The skyline craved erasure. Celeste stood at the window of her corner office, watching flakes swirl against the glass, her reflection faintly superimposed over the empire she now commanded. In the silence, she saw not the wreckage of betrayal, but the architecture of something new. Hale Morgan Capital had not collapsed with Adrian's disgrace. Under her, it had stabilized, recalibrated, and begun to grow in ways no one had imagined possible. She turned back to the boardroom where her allies waited. Genevieve Archer, with her orchids and pearls. Conrad Blake, with his smirk, sharpened into respect. Nathan Caldwell is steady and deliberate, and his loyalty is earned through arithmetic, not sentiment. Even Maya Lynn, once invisible in Adrian's shadow, now sat with authority, her single percent amplified by Celeste's recognition. Together, they formed a coalition that was less fragile than ambition alone. They represented survival stitched into strategy. "We are not merely repairing," Celeste said, her voice firm. "We are redefining. Our name has been dragged across headlines as a scandal, but the scandal fades. What endures is structure, discipline, integrity." She outlined new compliance measures, stricter auditing, and transparent governance. Every word was chosen to signal not revenge, but rebirth. The board nodded, some with relief, others with cautious admiration. They understood she was not ruling from fury, but from vision. Yet power outside the office demanded equal attention. The press clamored for her presence, and invitations poured from conferences, panels, and summits. She selected carefully, appearing not everywhere but precisely where influence multiplied. At Davos, she spoke not of betrayal but of resilience, her calm delivery drawing nods from world leaders and investors alike. At Columbia University, she addressed a hall of students, Marcus among them, telling them that integrity was not naivety but strategy. Applause thundered. Marcus watched with a pride that dulled his lingering unease, recognizing that his mother was no longer merely surviving scandal. She was shaping legacy. Adrian remained a shadow on the city's periphery. Rumors placed him in cheap apartments, smoky bars, borrowed suits that hung too loose on his frame. Once he was photographed by every magazine that mattered. Now he was captured only by chance, a blurred figure avoiding cameras, a cautionary tale muttered in hushed tones. The FBI's case deepened, his name tethered to words like indictment and forfeiture. Celeste never spoke his name. To her, he was not an enemy or a ghost. He was nothing. Vanessa gave birth in spring, quietly, away from headlines. Celeste received a single photo of the child, sent through Chloe with no note attached. She studied it in silence. A baby swaddled in pale cloth, eyes closed, innocent of the storm that had preceded her. Celeste placed the photo on her desk, not as a sentiment, but as a reminder. Consequences extend beyond the guilty. Innocence must be shielded from ruin. At home, the atmosphere softened. Marcus's laughter returned, tentative at first, then stronger. He hosted friends, debated professors, and began dreaming aloud of his future beyond the shadow of betrayal. Celeste encouraged him, but reminded him gently that names carry weight. What he built would always be measured against what had come before. He nodded, understanding, but his eyes shone with determination. He would carry the name, but he would forge it differently. One evening, months after the gala, Celeste hosted a dinner in the ballroom where Adrian had fallen. The chandeliers glittered again, but there were no roses, vows, or illusions this time. The guests were leaders, investors, thinkers, not sycophants. She stood at the head of the table and raised her glass. "To endurance," she said, "to build not on illusion, but on truth." The room answered with applause that rang genuine. When the evening ended, she walked alone onto the balcony, the city sprawling beneath her like a living map. The night air was cold, her gown brushing against the stone as she leaned into the railing. She thought of the journey from suspicion to devastation, from ashes to this moment. She had not planned to become a queen, yet circumstance had crowned her all the same. The city pulsed, indifferent and eternal, but she felt her permanence. Betrayal had not broken her, it had revealed her. From the fracture, she had forged a foundation. From ruin, she had built a reign. She lifted her glass again to the stars and whispered a vow no one else would ever hear. The reign begins now.